I of an age, of a generation that knew people that worked and interacted, or that knew, in other words, knew A. Russell personally. And one of my, I can say, some of these people, my oldest informant was a lady, she was born in 1883, and they would have worked in Marble Hill House. They would have worked in Ards, which was the seat of the Stuart Bams in their time, and they have very wide range of stories that they passed on to me. So to start with, the AE, you'll say, how did he come to be in Donegal? Well, my theory is that Hugh A. Law was an MP, a nationalist, an Irish National Party MP from 1902 to 1918, and he also then served later on in the 1920s in the New Dáil. But Hugh Law was belonged to a wealthy County Meath family that had his father was very high up in the British administration in Dublin. In fact, he was the Lord Chancellor of Ireland in the last years of the 19th century. But what happened then was that Hugh A. Law, his son, married Charlotte Stewart. In other words, she was known as Lotta, and they, with their wealth, they bought the rectory at Marble Hill, which is Marble Hill House, and a small estate with it. But Hugh A. Law was one of these wonderful people that, in a true sense, was caring for the community, and he tried to attract all the different people that would be of benefit to it. And of course, it was, as it was mentioned by earlier speakers, where the Irish Renaissance or revival, Celtic revival, was taking place. And Marble Hill House became a mecca or a hub for all these people. And of course, among them was A.E. Russell, Horace Plunkett, Paddy the Cope. These were all mentioned earlier. And Jack B. Yeats was also a visitor. Now, there was no tourist infrastructure here much of the time except a few boarding houses. And one of those boarding houses is still there, but it's not used now as a private house, Mullins of Brahy, overlooking Port na Bla. And Mullins of Brahy have a visitor's book where all the different people that it was mainly, of course, gentry, as they called them at the time, that would have come to that. Some of the names would be, of course, Jack B. Yeats was one of those who stayed there, and also Scott of the Antarctic. I collaborated with Father David in Ards Friary when he was compiling the book on the history of Ards, and he actually wrote to Scott, Peter Scott, the naturalist. And Peter Scott was alive at the time, and he sent a lovely letter back, and he told about the pleasant memories he had of being in this area. And as a child, he cycled down a slope and in the front door of this particular house. So you can see immediately the attraction to this area. Now, A.E. Russell, of course, was very friendly with the Laws, and himself and Lotta Law collaborated together in this quest for more information about the spiritual dimension to life. And of course, their main quest was the fairies. And there's some very amusing stories, and of course locals found it very amusing as to all that the exploits that they were up to. One of them was, and if you know the Sheephaven Bay, there's quite a large island to the east of Marble Hill Beach. We would call it Patterson's Island, but on the map it's marked as Clonmass Island. And they used to go out there, spend the night there, looking and listening to see if they could hear the fairies or see them performing. I don't know whether they did. But also, in his paintings as well, he used the young the Law family children as subjects in his paintings. They're painted as sort of fairy characters. If you see any of his paintings in Marble Hill with the grey trunks of the beech trees and that. So he did quite a lot of painting. In fact, my father, as quite a young man, he would have been a sort of a teenager at the time, with a much older friend from Derry, were walking along on that particularly beautiful part where you leave the Marble Hill Big Beach going towards the smaller beach. It's an elevated road where you're looking out through frame pictures through the beech trees. And they'd seen this man sitting with a beard painting. And when they went past, this older man says, "Do you know who that is?" That's A.E. Russell. Of course, he never heard of E. This was part of his, he was actually doing one of his paintings. Now, as well as that, he rented a house. He rented a house there at a place called Parkmore and stayed there. And while he was there, when he was leaving in the autumn, he employed a local woman with a big family to do his washing for him. And he gave her 2 of his paintings. And one of them is particularly, you can identify it immediately as a Russell, in that it has the trees, the children, and the other one, of course, was based down in Galway. It's a more lighter colour. Also, he stayed at another house as a boarder up at the Brahe. It's a very exposed house, but there are great views around from it. And the family there, the Stewart family, in fact, by a coincidence, the man that lived there was a retired RIC man from Lurgan. So he stayed there. Now, I know that the group that were here in the autumn 2 years ago visited and seen these photographs. I haven't seen them. I did see the ones from Parkmore. So that gives you an idea of his depth of contact with the local people. Now, there's when we're talking about the house on Brahe, I always point out to them the painting here in Glenveigh Castle. It's titled Muckish. That was literally painted outside their front door where he set up his easel, and he had a view of Muckish with various hills in the foreground. So that can be identified exactly where it was painted from. He also, of course, mentioned there his association with Arthur Kingsley Porter. And Porter, of course, admired him. And, of course, it was well illustrated in the earlier talks about him being down on Maharorty Pier waiting on them on that fateful day in August 1933 when Kingsley Porter didn't come back. But these are just a few points that I just wanted to mention about Russell. Now, the question is then about the other families that were involved. I mentioned earlier about Hugh A. Law. He invited these various different people to come to stay, and of course they in turn then spread the word around. And at that time there was great optimism. You had over in the opposite side, you had the 5th Earl of Leitrim developed the Rosapenna Hotel, and in those days, of course, it wasn't mass tourism. It was people, usually wealthy people, that came, and as a result of that, they came to the area. So these are just a few points that related. Last week, I gave a talk on the stewards of Ards and William Murray in Manor Cunningham. And there were 2 people there from the opposite side, and they were looking across at Marble Hill, and they could see that Marble Hill House has changed. Now, I should point out to you, my last encounter with this wonderful group was at Marble Hill House in August 2023, and we discussed. And it was wonderful to meet there because you could sense the atmosphere where A.E. Russell spent, I'm sure, many happy days. And there's a very well-researched book on Arthur Kingsley Porter, which also points out that A.E. Russell, the law, Hugh A. Law, and the various, uh, um, probably the lawyers and that. It was in the sitting room of Marble Hill House that the deal was clinched where Kingsley Porter bought the estate here in Glenveigh. So that just gives you an idea of the close association they had with this area. And I say now, AE said that he was really in love with this particular part of the world, and he said everywhere where he set up his easel, he had a scene to paint. So that just gives you an idea. So these are just a few points that I felt. Now I should point out as well, for your own perusal and research, there's an archive, a government-sponsored archive called the Law Photographic Archive, which has a number of photographs. One, I think, is a grainy photograph of A.E. Russell sitting on the rock down on the beach at Marble Hill, and I can point out the exact rock that he was sitting on. But as well as that, Lotta Law had a passion for building houses, and she built the two houses, Umracam and Umrafree, that you can still see there today. And she also built a little house up in the woods, and they called it the Fairy House. It was actually a playhouse for children. But there's actually a photograph of, I think it's probably in the Law's private collection, it shows A.E. Russell sitting in this house. But in that particular house, he painted on the wall a beautiful mural. It was actually a maritime scene where you seen fish and green water, so to speak. But sadly, that little house was very badly vandalized way back about 20 or 30 years ago, and is a ruin at this point in time. So as I say, also Lotta Law, his daughter, who lived in Umracam, Umracam that she lived in, she said that all these different people that came there, the Laws were very hospitable to them. And Patrick Pearse was there at a Cayley Inn. They actually had a dance hall there at Marble Hill House, and they held Cayleys. It was part of this Celtic revival. So these are just a few points. But what I would point out as well now, I'm happy to say that Marble Hill House has been restored by Natalie. She was here, she had to leave. She has changed hands a number of times. It was first bought by a gentleman called Davin, and then Mr. Harrison, and of course Natalie's mother, Dorothy Joblin Purser, in the early 70s, totally restored it. It then was neglected, but her grandniece now has greatly restored it. So if you're ever down at Marble Hill, you can see it set in beautiful grounds there overlooking Shiphaven Bay. So these are just a few points that ties the great E. Russell to the local area. So thank you very much.